Time to go inside Utah politics. Now, 4 Republican candidates have officially launched campaigns to be the next chief executive of our state. They include Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox, Utah County businessman Jeff Birmingham, Salt Lake County Councilwoman Amy Winder-Newton, and former Governor and Ambassador John Huntsman Jr. Now, other candidates are still testing the waters as well. Jason Perry, the director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics, is here with some insight on where the race stands and where it will go from here. Jason, always glad to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Glad to be with you.
Okay, so we just saw the 4 who are officially in. Let's take that field as it stands and stack up the race. Okay. What are you seeing?
Well, this is such an interesting race, and how often do we get this many really great candidates? It's really amazing to see, and it's really been, I don't know, you and I have talked about this in the past, it's been decades since we've had an open seat for governor, so we can see a lot of people coming forward. Of the candidates right now, really the people who are really polling the best, it's John Huntsman Jr. and Spencer Cox. Names that people know very well, that's helping them. They already have some financing as well. But these other candidates are really trying to make a name for themselves as well. But those are the 2 right now that seem to be really pulling atop.
Okay, and we'll talk about how dynamic could shift in this race in a bit. But let's get into those who are testing the waters or rumored to be in. Who could still get into this race?
Well, there's a couple that I think are highly likely. We've talked about them in the press. I think Thomas Wright is most likely in. He's making some of those phone calls. People were really talking to him about getting into this race. He's doing some of the listening tour things that one should do. Highly likely we're going to see him jump in the race. I think Greg Hughes is very likely to do it as well. He's raised a lot of money for someone who hasn't announced, you know, $500,000 already.
I think it's safe to say Hughes is definitely in.
Yeah, I'll go with you on that one. Yeah, he's kind of telling some people that's where he is too. So I think those 2 are most likely. The one that we're hearing about that really hasn't really signaled is Rob Bishop. He's leaving his seat in Washington, D.C. Amazingly silent, and maybe the silence is what's telling us the most.
Any thoughts on what he's weighing or what could or could not get him into the race?
I think he's spending time just really wrapping up his time in Washington, D.C. There will be a moment, and he keeps telling people out in the world, he said, really the right time to announce this, if I'm going to, is in January. So he wants to do it right before the session starts if he's going to do it. It's interesting because of all the candidates we've just mentioned, he's the one that's saying the least publicly about his intentions.
But he can also do that because he has name ID.
He does. And really, if you want to be successful in this race, it is such an advantage to have name ID and to have money. And the people who are up front right now are there, and he's got both of those really ready to go. He's great at raising funds, has proven so in the past.
Let's talk, okay, so let's take the first 2, Thomas Wright and Greg Hughes. If those 2 are in, how does that shift the dynamic of this race?
Well, it becomes a race of 2 key efforts. All the candidates who are in right now that we know for sure are really not too far away from each other on the political spectrum. So they're going to cannibalize each other a lot right there.
And that's more of the conservative?
That is more of the moderates.
I mean. Okay.
Yeah, more of the moderates right there. And if you get Hughes and Wright to jump in, which I think they will, this really pulls the supporters from the right end of the spectrum. They both have a lot of Republican credentials. They've been involved with them for a long time, and those 2 are really going to take the far right.
See, and I was kind of thinking Jeff Birmingham might jump into that lane as well. Any thoughts there?
Yeah,
because I'm hearing from a lot of people who tend to be on the more conservative side that they're liking him.
Well, I think that they are, and I think for him, he needs to start skewing more to the right. He identifies very well with the business community, the venture capital community, and he's making a lot of effort to reach out to those groups. So I think the moderates, that's kind of a sweet spot for him, but he will skew further right. And this creates this plurality issue, which is just going to be the thing to watch.
I wanted to get into you there. Let's take a look at one other thing, though. So you have Thomas Wright and Jeff Birmingham in the business sector. That's kind of where they're coming up. The rest of them have political office. How does that potentially weigh on voters' minds?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of these candidates have true records to run on, all right? And that's why you see some of them have negatives already. You say they're popular in one group and they're negative in another. It's because we've known them for a long time. The people who love them, love them. The ones that don't seem to forget. So that has an impact on the candidates that we know very well. Newcomers like him have opportunity, not just now, but maybe for a race in the future. Run a good race, build the name ID, really kind of live to fight another day, maybe even take advantage of this plurality issue, and maybe even do better than we think.
Okay, let's get into that more. When you take a look at the Salt Lake City mayoral race, we saw plurality have an impact on that and change the dynamic. Could we potentially see that in this governor's race as well?
I think we're going to see that, particularly when you have so many moderate candidates. They will have an impact on each other, but really if they cannibalize each other, you start getting small percentage of voters who are supporting them. And then you see the far right, and you could see someone like a Thomas Wright, for example, 25–30% of the vote ends up being the winner because that's the one person that can get the most. The other candidates are going to have to guard against that. But there's one thing that not many people are talking about that I think is so interesting is how many people will affiliate as Republicans for that primary.
That's a very good point. What do you think is going to happen there?
I think a lot of people will. I mean, that's just the reality of it. You know, we talk about there being a lot of Republicans in Utah, and there are, but there's an enormous number of independents that go both ways, depending on the candidate. But they will and can affiliate with the Republican Party and vote in that election. And I think there will be enough of them that it will have an impact, and it will bring people from all sides of the spectrum.
Because if you look at it, it's been how many decades now since a Democrat has won statewide office? So people probably look at that and say, that's the election my voice will make more of a difference in. Yeah, that's a very interesting concept.
Even Democrats. I mean, that's the thing. We'll see some Democrats affiliate as Republicans to vote in that primary, particularly if they identify with one of these candidates.
Are we going to see all of the candidates go both convention and signature route?
I think every single one of them will. You know, when they ask me, when they do, I'll tell you, I think it's just malpractice not to do that. The law allows you to do both, and I think someone should. But, you know, the second question comes, should you ever skip the convention? I don't think anyone should do that.
Yeah.
I think everyone should spend time doing both the tracks.
Okay. Let's talk about timing. This primary is going to come up right in the middle of summer on June 30th. Middle of family vacations, you know, break from school. What impact might that have on this race?
It's going to have an impact on turnout for sure. In the last election, we had about 53% of the registered Republicans showed up to vote. I'm hoping we hit that again. But those summer months are just really hard to get people engaged in the process. But, you know, we still have a chance to vote by mail. My hope is that people still turn out. But this is an important enough race. And if you think people are going to see enough of these candidates that it'll be top of mind, I think they'll show up.
And we have certainly seen vote by mail make a huge impact on our turnout, no doubt about that. I want to bring up another thing that maybe we haven't talked about much, and you mentioned the field. We are seeing a lot of friends pinned against each other here, not only candidates, but their staff. What do you make of that? I mean, one great example is Governor Herbert endorsing Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox in this. All of a sudden, former governor, who Herbert was the lieutenant governor for, jumps in the race. Are we making some awkward moments here?
There are a lot of people that are mostly just giving out big checks now. So I have so many friends in the race, the only thing I can do is really give money to everyone. That's happening for a few folks, but it does become a little bit awkward with our own Governor Herbert. As you know, he's been on opposite sides of Governor Huntsman and who he is supporting in the past. Like, for example, you know, Governor Romney, when he was running for president, versus John Huntsman, who was supporting John McCain. They're used to picking different sides. They're still going to be friends, but a lot of people are in a very precarious position right now when they got to choose between their friends.
Yeah, and I get that. You know, when you talk about it in open, you're still going to be friends. But behind scenes, is there some animosity there?
Well, it's going to get more difficult as we get closer. Right now, everyone's kind of friends. We're trying to see who jumps in. But once the field narrows a bit, and the polling starts to show who's on top and who's thinking they should be, it's going to get a little more nasty, and those tensions are going to really start to go high.
Boy, it's going to be a fascinating race, no doubt about that. Appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for being here this morning.
Glad to be with you.